whatever it is that you're referencing. And so again, this approach that Gary was just talking about when we're trying to take things into consideration, these other systemic inequities that exist, whether it's transportation, daycare services, job disadvantages, whatever it may be, these things are not considered when we're talking about, why perhaps somebody may have even been charged in the past, and the over-criminalization of people of color, and all these different things must be taken into account, and right now they aren't.
So I was fortunate enough to come across this amazing forum in doing some preliminary research on launching CBO, a charitable bail organization in Monroe County. And for the audience, these are essentially not-for-profit bail bond agencies that can post bonds for defendants facing misdemeanors with bails under $2,000. And actually, the statistics we saw in New York City have probably been heavily affected by 4 very successful organizations there. But based on the proposed legislation that I learned about tonight, God willing, that kind of Band-Aid solution, which has only been around for, I think, 5 or so years, would no longer be necessary. So I guess my question is, given that in my lifetime I haven't learned that lawmakers are generally the ones who are solving big problems, what is the timeline on this and like the probability that you would imagine of it going through?
Well, let me make one quick observation. The governor's proposed legislation actually has a provision that would modify the charitable bail statute to allow you to post bail for any offense up to $5,000. So I do envision the potential need for charitable bail funds, even if this statute were to pass, for helping persons that are accused of a violent felony offense, a low-level violent felony offense. What is the likelihood of this passing? Well, that's a heck of a question. And if I could guess that accurately, I'd be a lobbyist. I think there's a lot of momentum for bail reform in New York right now. The governor has proposed other criminal justice legislation that I don't think is going to pass as is, but bail reform is the hot topic right now in the legislature and with the governor. Is it going to pass as is? I doubt it. I think there's going to be some tweaking. I think that there's a big push to modify the preventative detention components. From my understanding and talking with people that know more than I do on this issue, the governor is open to discussing some of those issues in regards to preventative detention. But I think something is going to happen this year.
And also too, we are happy for the governor's support, but I really wouldn't frame his support as a solution. I wouldn't frame his support as a solution. It is support, and I think that the credit needs to go to the grassroots organizations like that young man was talking about, and organizing and advocacy, which we hope that you'll join in on us. And one thing too we haven't really looked at is the danger, to stress the danger of pretrial release conditions. Again, people are innocent until proven guilty, and so we need to really stress that, because we don't want people to end up with criminal records if they're not guilty. So if you have a criminal history, employment, housing, credentialing, a lot of things come into play with that.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, of course, with any piece of legislation, we can't necessarily provide a timetable as to whether or not it's going to be passed in a certain year and whatnot, but I do want to recognize that with not only Governor Cuomo coming out and again addressing bail reform as an issue in the state, but the fact is there is current legislation right now. There's current interest along so many various counties across New York State right now. There are other organizations that are really trying to push this forward, and it's really up to you and your involvement that will actually impact whether or not something will get done. I don't want you to say that it's up to the legislature, because it's not. It's up to you to push for that. And if you don't like what the legislator does at the very end of this session, vote them out. This is an election year, right? I mean, I'm glad that Gary mentioned we have a quote-unquote Democratic majority in the state Senate. But with the IDC in place, if you're not happy, and I understand they don't, their jurisdiction doesn't fall within our region entirely, but it's good to focus in on that. And again, we do have state senators here who are probably going to vote against an initiative like this, a proposal like this. So how do we convince them? And if they can't be convinced, how can we make sure that they don't get their next term? How do we make sure that we actually support a candidate that actually wants to support something like this? And why should it even be of interest to those who might be a little bit more conservative minded? You know, and I think again, it's important to start to frame things in that sense. And I think, again, I'm really glad to see so many coalitions and so much interest from advocates like yourselves who are really interested in pushing this along on our community's agenda. It truly, truly impacts people in not only in the city of Rochester, but beyond. And again, this is not, this is not a new issue, right? But this is our year. This is our year to make something happen. And if it doesn't happen now, vote them out in November, and let's do it again the next. But again, I just want to say that it's so important for you guys all to push. So don't walk away saying, I've learned enough, this is all I gotta do, let's go on. No, this is just the beginning.
And people have really
Here. Listen, excuse me, on this side of the table, I don't know if you've noticed or not, but this is where people of color are sitting, and we have been repeatedly ignored. So I think you should have a wider peripheral vision. There was a woman who called. He's been raising his hand a lot, and he's been raising his hand a lot since the beginning of your talk.
I think
He comes first, but you're not looking at the
I'm sorry,
at all.
it probably would have been helpful if it was more than just, if we had two people up here who were.
No, but you need to scan.
This is directed to Mr. Donaher. Sir, in Manhattan and Brooklyn, it appears the prosecutor's office has adopted policies that are somewhat similar to the governor's proposal, eliminating bail for certain nonviolent crimes. In Dutchess County, the prosecutor's taken the other position and basically said, screw you, I'm sticking with it as it is. What's the position here in Monroe County?
Well, first, you're absolutely right. Cyrus Vance in Manhattan just announced that prosecutors are not going to be asking for bail in misdemeanor offenses in Manhattan. And in Dutchess County, I'm aware that's one of the reasons why that led to that Supreme Court decision that said judges have to consider ability to pay in setting bail. I take a very clear position of I never speak for Ms. Dorothy. And she's very good at speaking on her own behalf, and frankly, I haven't discussed with Ms. Dorothy her position on the governor's proposed legislation. Thank you.
I do know that the District Attorneys Association is against the governor's legislation. And their position is we need to study this issue further. Well, frankly, exactly, as Precious has pointed out, there have been studies and studies and studies, and they all come to the same conclusion. The pretrial incarceration rate, not only in New York, but across the country, is way too high and has significant adverse impacts on our community, especially for people of color. So I don't see why we have to study this anymore. That's my take. But again, if you're asking me what Ms. Dorley says, I don't know.
Well, I'm retired, so I can say whatever I want. I don't have to be nice like Tim. And I do, yeah. So, and going along with what Tim and Aman said, so this is why it's so important for you to stay involved and to push this issue. And I'm going to just use one quick example. I see some of my friends out here that who fought for equal marriage. And as we remember that fight, all right, we didn't think it was going to pass that year. You know, year after year, we kept putting stuff in the legislature, and there were judicial fights on getting equal marriage. And I'll tell you what, when it passed, I think some of us that have been working on it for years were probably as surprised as anyone. Because the problem is you just don't know when that tipping point is going to come. So don't get discouraged if this year it doesn't pass and next year it doesn't pass. If you're in this, be in it. Like Lincoln said, like I said, we have an obligation to those that sacrificed before us to make sure that this gets done. In answer to the question, the political reality about district attorneys. District attorneys are elected officials, and let's use Monroe County as an example. The city tends to be progressive and democratic. The outlying areas tend to be Republican and conservative. And again, nonpartisan, non-political. I don't care which party supports this, but you're going to see that there's going to be a tendency for Democrats to support this and Republicans and conservatives not to. The problem that we have is we need to convince people like Sandra Dorley of that economic argument, of the moral argument, to the point where she can feel comfortable running on this platform. Because you gotta know that if she were to come out for DAs, elected DAs in many, not only Monroe County, but many counties, especially in the southern tier and the North Country, were to come out and say that they're for bail reform, the first thought that they're gonna have as politicians is my adversary is gonna say during the campaign I was soft on crime. You know, and that's something that when you lobby, and as we work towards this, be prepared to address in lobby sessions with DAs and others, is what is our answer to that gonna be? And that's really gonna be the challenge. But that's the political reality of getting district attorneys behind this. I wish they were, and you know what, there might be private conversations where they feel that it's a good thing to do, but then you have to deal with the political realities, which some of us have. They're always thinking is, how is my opponent gonna use this against me in a primary or a general election?
So other than DAs, who are the other organizations that would be opposed to bail reform? And what is the primary reason that they would oppose it?
Bail bondsmen, that's the number one. Nationwide, they've led the bail reform is a nationwide issue, it's just not New York. But the bail bonds industry has been very active in opposing bail bonds, using all of the same tropes and red herrings that are thrown out. It's that it's going to lead to increased crime and the blood in the streets and everything else. When the states that have actually effectuated bail reform, there's been no increase in crime at all.
What about the police?
The police, generally I think that they are against it. I think there's some very progressive police chiefs that probably are for it, but when you say broadly the police, I think it's fair to say most of them would be against it, bail reform. Gary, have you talked to anybody about it?
No, I think that's a pretty fair assessment. You're just gonna find, just as a knee-jerk reaction, they're gonna be against it.
I can see some hands again.
I know, she is, been having hands up for years over here.
Okay, my question is, but you talk about bail reform, you keep speaking of bail reform, systematic racism, issues of how crime affects the communities of color, and change. But how do you change behavior? The only way you can really change is the people who are committing crimes. There's no responsibility on them. So they are the ones who affect their children. What is their responsibility?
Can't hear you.
What is the responsibility of people who are committing crimes? Okay. What is the responsibility? How do you change the behavior of people who are committing crimes? They are impacting their children. It can't just be systematic racism. Because, even kids need to grow up. They need to be in good schools. And this is issues with their parents. We don't talk about their parents' responsibility. We want to hold everybody else responsible. We say people of color. Crime don't just affect the people, black communities or people of color, not just blacks. Crime affects the whole society because society pays for bail. They pay for all of the issues of children not being educated, children continue living in poverty. You have to stop, being want to be politically correct and say that, it's just drugs. People make a conscious decision to use drugs. And parents are responsible for their behavior on kids. They don't send the kids to school. When do these kids have the opportunity to live outside of poverty? What do we have to hold parents responsible. We can't, it's not just racism. And even if it's just racism is never going to die. But kids are dying because of the decisions of their parents. So what reform do we put on parents?
Okay. I don't know if I should have gave you that mic or not. But I respect your opinions, and I just, when people say that, you know, we need not talk about race, you know.
We can talk about race, don't have racism.
Well, just hold up, let me answer, let me just try to address your question, because, you know, it's tough to kind of answer that. Because from where we sit at, from where I sit at, our personal responsibility has something to do with it, but it doesn't have, it's not the ground root issue, okay? So when people can't pay their light bills, or people are impoverished, it has an effect on them. So when we talk about a country who has a savage history of racism and taking land and shutting people out, you know, that has a historical impact, and it's still resonating in the communities. I mean, some of these violent tendencies that people have are epigenetic from slavery, because they witnessed and experienced so much trauma and abuse. And there was no mental health. You know, we have all of these things put into place now. You know, there was no way to navigate anything other than to take drugs or to oppress people who were in your neighborhood, so the oppressed people oppressed other people. So parents do have a responsibility. They do. Okay, but we have a responsibility to make sure that we live in an equal society that gives them the right to have the things that they need: jobs, education, good places to live, places where kids are not exposed to lead and they don't do well in school. And so our city school district is not, you know, in good shape, you know, and it's not just because parents don't send their kids to school. You know, it's a lot of issues that you're talking about. So, you know, it's not all about race, but it is about race. Well, we're trying to help people with engaging in sort of like a critical conscious state, to realize the state that they're in, to become more involved in situations that move the country to equality. So that's one thing. People who are in movements who have been affected or impacted by some of the things that you're talking about, they come out better learning more information about how to raise families better, you know, how to protect their children. You know, they feel so hopeless. That's what it is. It's like this learned sense of hopelessness that no matter what I do, I'm not going to rise above it.
We cannot allow parents to have those. We can't allow parents to have those outs. I mean, you send your kids. I sent my son to school. He had to go to school. I did not accept any excuses for him. We can't accept excuses. Kids, too many kids are just dying.
But we're not accepting excuses.
But you're allowing parents. You're just talking about bail. You're allowing parents. You can't change this. Parents have to change this.
That's
the responsibility has to be on the
bail and parenting.
You want me to go? No, I mean, people keep going.
I think this is not, and no offense to any experience or whatnot, but I think parenting is not a subject of bail reform in any way, and I think that's subject.
I don't mean that's a subject of bail reform, but people go in and out of jail.
I think that's what we're trying to acknowledge is these behaviors and these patterns, perhaps what could potentially, I know.
They just go in and out of jail, bail.
But society's behaviors have to change too.
No, society don't have to change.
Oh, okay.
Individual has to change.
Well,
We can follow up afterwards.
One at a time.
Excuse me. I would just say that looking to solve some of the issues that are injustices in the bail system, it's not excluding looking at other issues and dealing with parenting issues and such. There are problems in the bail system, and that's what we're trying to address. There is someone here. But I have to say, I want to say one thing, is there are people who are starting to leave, and I did want to address some of the papers that are on the table. There are letters, there are advocacy letters. Please take a look at the letters. If you're comfortable with them, please sign it. Someone asked before about, what's happening with legislation. Currently, in Albany, the governor's proposal is being taken up in the Assembly. It's in the Codes Committee, and they are working with the governor's office to draft the legislation. And so one of the letters there is addressed to the chair of the Codes Committee in the Assembly. The other letter is addressed to Senator Flanagan, who's the majority leader in the Senate. And he has said that the Senate is not going to take this up. So the letters to send to him to pressure him that people want it taken up. So those are the two. There's also a resource list of community groups locally in Rochester that are working with the Free New York campaign and a couple of other statewide groups. And there's information if you want to link and read the governor's legislative proposal itself. The information is on there that you can get that. On the back table over there are some papers from Metro Justice, one of our co-sponsoring organizations, and information from Free New York. Tim Donaher had brought in copies of his PowerPoint. I'm not sure if there's any left. They're all. If you, I'm sorry, we didn't have a registration person when you came, so we didn't get all your names and emails, but there was a couple of sheets of paper going around, and if you provided that, we will send out some more information to you, some extra copies of the letter. There's also on each of the table, there's only one copy of an analysis of the governor's proposal that was put out by the Cattell Center. And I think we can put that as an attachment in an email if you provide us with your emails. That said, let's see, it is 8:25. We have to be out of here at 9 o'clock, but if you'd like to stay and continue with questions, is everybody else okay to stay till 9? Okay, I'm really sorry. I do want to get everybody who's raising their hand. There's someone over here who has the mic. I'm sorry. Oh, you can leave signed letters on the table and we will send them in. Okay? And you can add comments on the back of.
Yes? Whoa, all right. I have 2 issues I'd want to ask about, panel. The little kid over here. I wanted to ask about the 3% surcharge, and I wanted to see if I understand it correctly. So somebody gets a $10,000 bail, they get acquitted, they show up, they get acquitted, and they're still paying that $300?
Yep. That would be correct.
First, they don't have to be acquitted, they just have to make all of their court appearances. Yes.
Okay, so they're innocent, but they're still paying $300. What happens if they can't pay that $300?
Well, if bail is posted with the court, then they get the check back with that already deducted. But keep in mind.
I'm sorry, she was talking to me.
Right.
Say that again.
If you post bail with the court, if it's money bail, then it gets, once you've made all your court appearances and the bail gets exonerated, they send you a check, it's deducted from that. But keep in mind that innocent people post bonds all the time, and they pay a bail bondsman, on average, it depends on the amount of the bond itself, around 10% of the bond amount. So if it's a $100,000 bond, they might be out a significant sum of money that they're never getting back, even if they're proven to be
Right.
innocent. So that is
That
one of
is
the
just
downsides of the bail
unbelievable.
system, and that's why the insurance bail bondsmen are against bail reform.
Okay, so my other question is kind of a scenario of talking about the stakeholders or who are going to lobby against this. You've already talked about it a little bit. But a scenario that's coming to my mind is that, yes, it's the bail bondsman and it's the prosecutors who are against it. So a scenario I'm seeing is that the bail bondsmen are probably some of the people who are funding the prosecutors' campaigns. Does anybody see that as a possible
Possible, I
scenario? So
suppose.
it might be something for the people who are working towards getting this, this legislation passed to trail the money and expose that.
That's possible.
It could be a help in lobbying for the
Well, my advice is to follow up with what Gary said. If you're lobbying this issue with a conservative lawmaker, point out that the Koch brothers are leading some very important initiatives on reducing mass incarceration right now. I mean, this is a big issue for some people on the right, and it's obviously a significant issue on people on the left. So depending on whom you're talking to, if you're talking to a conservative lawmaker, there's plenty of arguments that you can make for bail reform. I've talked to plenty of conservative lawmakers, and yes, they're very law and order, and yes, they generally fall in line with what the District Attorneys Association says, but certain arguments that you can make will resonate with them. The financial cost of holding somebody pretrial, but also, and this may shock you, the disparate impact bail has on people of color resonates with Joe Rohrbach. So, there are arguments to be made no matter who you're talking to, and I think that's possible.
Hello? Oh, there we go. I really wanted to ask this question when more people were here, but can you explain, Precious alluded to innocent people. Can you explain how often a plea bargain is taken so people who can't post bail will get out faster and not lose everything they have? Will you explain that?
Sure. If you're asking for actual numbers, I can't give you actual numbers. Are you asking me that does it happen in the criminal justice system that people will take a plea to something they did not do in order to get released from custody? Yes, that does happen. And I've often, in fact, the last time I was here speaking at a public event, I was educating persons that people will plead guilty to crimes they didn't commit. And people will sit there and go, oh, I would never, ever plead guilty to a crime I didn't commit. Not true. We will advise persons all the time in serious felony cases to say, you're facing 25 years, they're offering something where it's probation, take it. Take it. Because you'll never know what a jury's going to do. So that's a broader concept that people will plead guilty to crimes they didn't commit. But yes, a subset of that is they do it in order to get out of jail. And either it's because they can't pay bail, and yes, absolutely, they want to get out, they want to see their kids, they want to see their family, absolutely it happens. It happens very frequently in New York City, where they make a lot of offers at arraignment, and I talk to my fellow chiefs in New York City, and they say it happens all the time, all the time.
And could you speak to, the repercussions of when someone takes a plea bargain and for a felony that they didn't actually commit?
Well, it depends on, obviously, the level of the offense, but a common one, and this may or may not shock you, is sex crimes, child sex crimes, which will say to a client who is we believe to be innocent, you're facing such a significant sentence that we think that you should plead to their offering a misdemeanor. And the downside for that for most defendants is they become classified as sex offenders. And I know everybody in this room is thinking, I would never plead to a sex offense if I didn't do it. But you're not being realistic. If your attorney comes to you and says, there's a chance you're going to get convicted on this, and it doesn't, you can say you're innocent to the jury, but if they don't believe you, you're going to prison for 25 years. And right now they're offering you a misdemeanor plea with probation, you're going to take that. and then you're going to stand up in court and say you did it, and then you're going to have to register, you're going to have to be considered a sex offender. Now, that's obviously a horrific fact pattern, but it happens. Now, but in other cases, people plead to felonies that they didn't commit in order to get out of prison, or for a variety of reasons. But the downside to it, or the ramifications of that, you all know what could happen.
If I could just add one thing to that too. Just keep in mind, a lot of these defendants are young men, right? And here's something we know, right? Science tells us that a male's frontal lobes aren't fully developed until they're about 22 or 23 years old. That's the 25 maybe. That's the part of the brain that allows you to understand long-term consequences. So imagine this, you're sitting down with an 18 or 19-year-old and you're trying to make this deal. And quite frankly, to a lot of 18 and 19-year-olds, as we think back, you can tell them 5 years, 25 years, 50 years, or a lifetime. It was really kind of meaningless to them. So when you say to an 18-year-old or a 19-year-old or a 20-year-old, like, look, plead to this, yeah, you'll have this lifetime record. You'll always be, classified, or you'll always have this on your offense. You know what? To a 19-year-old, 20-year-old, that doesn't really mean that much. And that's one of the problems. It might, we might sit back, or even in your 30s or 40s, sit back and say, geez, that's not such a great deal. But if you're dealing with a 21-year-old male,
Women develop at 6 years old.
Why is there such a need for big business, private penal institutions, and is there a possibility of collusion between the judicial system and the private penal institutions?
Possibility, yes. In fact, we've seen that in the Pennsylvania juvenile system. I don't know how familiar you are with the Luzerne or Lancaster County scandal. About 7 years ago, judges were convicted and sent to prison for convicting juveniles and having them sent to a private incarceration facility, and then they were getting kickbacks. Is it possible? Yes. I don't think any judge in Monroe County would ever do that. I think the impact of private prisons is more on the legislative side. Their influence on legislators and across the country, and what type of laws they can pass in order to increase the rate of incarceration. I think that's the more likely output for that.
We'll take 2 more questions. 2 people here.
Or not.
Okay, I have a question on I need clarification on the memo that you want us to sign. I don't know who wrote it, but I want to understand. I thought you said they only want to eliminate bail on misdemeanor, and this says...
Misdemeanor nonviolent felonies.
Yeah, right, but this petition doesn't specify that. It says just all money bail. Am I missing something?
That's probably the Cattell Center, I'm guessing. I didn't direct that. That's an advocacy group.